So by doing so, we prevent them from using their equipment. Slide. There's three components of electronic warfare: electronic support, electronic attack, and electronic protection. Increasing importance of EW. So technology is evolving, the battlefield's evolving, and what means we're evolving. And we're having more, there's more importance on the electronic battlefield, or in the EMS spectrum. So what we want to do is improve our EMS capabilities in order to have control of the EMS spectrum and able to dominate our adversary. Electronic support is the surveillance of the EMS. It includes immediate threat recognition, threat avoidance, and homing and targeting. It also includes electronic intelligence and communication intelligence. Through surveillance, you can use, or you can receive ELINT and comment, such as the use of frequencies in the point of origin and potentially the destination or direction of which those frequencies came from, and those signals came from. Next slide. ES subdivisions. So you have wide spectrum surveillance. Oh, next slide. We are. So there's wide spectrum surveillance, wide dynamic ranges. The wider the better, essentially. This wide bandwidth capability means that you're able to cover more of a bandwidth and more frequencies, as well as with a wide range, that means you have more power and you'll be able to dominate the EMS. Next slide. Signal collection process. Signal warning alerts to the presence of the signal. Signal sorting uses frequency to sort out signals of immediate interest or action required. Signal analysis determines specific capabilities for immediate or future actions. Next slide. Electronic attack, the use of the EM or directed energy to attack personnel, facilities, or equipment. It's used actively or passively. Next slide. Go back one. Non-destructive EA is confusion, so it masks or hides real targets by cluttering the radio display, which is used as jamming or chaff or infrared flares. Next slide. These are a couple of versions or types of jamming. Spot jamming is when you have a good idea of where that frequency is coming from. So you're just pushing power to that exact frequency to jam them so they're unable to communicate. Barrage is fairly the same thing, but it's done at less power and at a wider frequency range. And sweeping is when you're going back and forth between a certain bandwidth. Next slide. Next slide. So this is just showing effective and ineffective jamming. Essentially, in order to effectively jam, you have to have the same amount or more power going to the frequency that whoever you're trying to block or jam has. Next slide. Next slide. Non-destructive EA, deception, create a false image or change the image on the enemy's radar display. And those are just types of deception used. Chaffs, radar decoys, blip enhancers. Chaffs are essentially just pieces of metal, aluminum dipoles that are shot out. It looks like a glitter bomb, essentially, that'll pop up on a radar screen that will mask your where you are. The next slide. And that's a EA-6B or 6 Bravo Prowler. It's a naval platform, so next slide. Destructive EA. We have anti-radiation missiles, and those are just a couple of types of those arms, as well as directed energy. Directed energy includes lasers or microwaves or particle beams. Next slide. And those are just a couple of more types of destructive EA. Next slide. And that's one of the missiles, the SLAM-ER, which is just a evolved version of the SLAM. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Electronic protection. The protection of friendly combat against undesirable effects of friendly or enemy employment EW. Next slide. 3 primary ways to defend ourselves from enemy EW. We can modify our radar, modify the medium, or modify the platform, which essentially just means electronic hardening. That's just literally just putting more material between your platform and whatever's trying to harm the platform. Next slide. Next slide. EP factors, burn through, increase the signal strength to overpower jamming noise. And this goes back to what I was saying about jamming. So as long as you have more power than what your adversary has, you'll be able to speak to whoever or utilize your equipment. Next slide. This is used by the Navy, so it doesn't really pertain to us. Next slide. Next slide. And these are, next slide. All right, U.S. airborne EW capabilities. So these are a few of the airborne platforms that use electronic warfare. Most of it you can see is electronic support, with the exception of the F-14. The F-18 is now, has been retired, so the F-14 is the only EA airborne platform that we currently use. Next slide. Any questions? Thank you.